everybody, this is Blake here. I'm going to be reviewing Paranormal Activity 4. For those who haven't heard, this is the worst received entry in the franchise. Very few people seem to like it. And of course, the series in general is very polarizing. You either love it or hate it. But now that I've seen the film, I can say without a fact that it is the weakest Paranormal Activity movie. But what's weird is while I was watching it, I didn't hate it. I didn't even really dislike it. I thought it was tolerable. It has its strengths. And there were quite a few moments where I did feel the suspense. I was into it. I was wringing my hands in anticipation. But even then, I felt that it was a step down from Paranormal Activity 3, the previous worst entry in the franchise. And it wasn't until as I was writing my review did I realize how weak Paranormal Activity 4 is. But to explain this, what I figured I'd do is I will talk about the previous movies, what I liked about them, and then compare this to those and explain why I believe that it is the flimsiest of them. Now, the first Paranormal Activity, the first half of that was, it exploits, certain fears we have when we find ourselves alone in the house in the middle of the night, where we will hear a certain noise in the background, and it's that fear of the unknown, and our mind starts playing tricks on us. Even though, more than likely, if the door happened to open, it would be a breeze. But what happens if it's not? I mean, I thought Paranormal Activity did a really good job when it comes to utilizing that. But of course, other people won't see it that way. They'll just see, like, okay, the door is moving slightly. That's not really scary. So it'll be tedious and boring for them, and I totally respect that. But where I think the film really starts to work is during the second half, when it becomes more about the characters' growing fear and paranoia. Initially the paranormal entity was just doing small shit that you wouldn't even really notice. But now it's becoming increasingly hostile, more dangerous, and their fear starts becoming infectious. So it's more about growing tension. It starts off slow, but as time goes on, it becomes more and more suspenseful. Now, Paranormal Activity 4 has a totally different structure. For one, the scares, or if you want to call them scares, they start a little bit earlier. At least that's what I felt. It wasn't just like real small stuff. It becomes more obvious earlier on that there is something supernatural within the house. And what it will do is it'll build into a pretty decent scare, but then it will start all over again. It will go back to the smaller stuff and then build up to another decent scare. It got to a point where it felt like it had more than one climax, and the final climax isn't even the best of the climaxes. So that was really awkward and disappointing, but that's also the same structure that Paranormal Activity 2 and 3 utilized. Paranormal Activity 2 became less about building tension and more about jump scares. But that movie delivered some really good jump scares. So even though there are more slow moments, there are also more high moments, even though as a whole I believe it is the weaker film compared to Paranormal Activity 1. And then Paranormal Activity 3 also has that same kind of style and structure, but it also has more weak points, the more dull moments, weaker characters, but it also had some really good jump scares too. So Paranormal Activity 4 can be redeemed if it has really good jump scares. Now, when I think about jump scares from the previous movies, now the first one didn't have a whole lot of those, believe it or not. But with Paranormal Activity 2, I remember when she's in the kitchen and suddenly all the cabinets slam open. I mean, it was a great jump right there. And then Paranormal Activity 3 has actually an even better one, even though it was weaker than the second one as a whole, where the fan cam is tracking the woman. Then she comes back and she sees something really weird in the kitchen, and you're like, what is she looking at? And then suddenly all the furniture crashes down. That was a great moment. So what does Paranormal Activity 4 have? An old woman suddenly appears. Okay, that made me jump, admittedly, but that's just so lame compared to the previous films. And, how does it try to build suspense? Well, it uses this weird Xbox Kinect vision. I didn't really understand that. To be fair, I had never even played Kinect, so I don't know how that shit works. In fact, I don't even really know what she was filming with. I'm really behind on technology. And while it sort of creates an interesting gimmick, it doesn't really do a whole lot with it. It's never that effective, never that scary. Like, the third film had that fan cam. At least that sort of built suspense because you were wondering, what's going to show up here. But I just never, I don't know, it just seemed silly in this one. So that really didn't work. What else can I say when it comes to jump scares? Oh yeah, I use some real cheap-ass editing tricks, too. So you'll see a kid get out of bed, and then suddenly it jump cuts to him by the door. That was a fucking, I hate when movies do that. That's cheap and manipulative, and it's not even really scary, but for some reason people in the audience were jumping at that. That was kind of embarrassing for them. But otherwise, there isn't a whole lot of good scares. There isn't a whole lot of memorable scares. I mean, there are ones, like I said, where I was totally into it, but I can't really go back and quote those scenes because they just seem so lame when I say them out loud. Like the garage incident was okay, but I don't know, just nothing that really stood out. So, okay, it fails when it comes to building suspense and when it comes to jump scares. But now the weaknesses that have really been around since the first movie really start to show up. The previous films at least tried to justify why they're going around with the camera, even when they don't need it. It was always a stretch of the imagination as to why they would do that. But here it's like they don't even try to justify it. Now, early on, when she starts to suspect something weird's going on, especially, just to give a brief sentence or two dedicated to the story, this normal family's life is interrupted when somebody moves across the street. We don't know who exactly, but the mother is sent to the hospital, and so they have to watch the kid, who's really weird and creepy, and of course something paranormal has followed him into the house. And so the daughter, the main character, she starts thinking that there's just something really weird about this kid. So what they do is they rig all the laptops and computers, and they have a bunch of them, to film everything in the house. But it's weird, and this is actually one thing I liked at first, is over time, as it becomes more apparent that something is haunting them, they completely forget about the footage. They stop reviewing it, even, and of course, when they stop reviewing it, that's when real crazy shit starts to happen. That's actually what I like, because I don't think people would really pay a whole lot of attention to that stuff if they were really scared. But she continues to go around with her, whatever she's using as a handheld camera, and it's weird because at one point she even goes into some stranger's house, not expecting anything supernatural. She just sees the two kids going there, and she's going to follow them and bring them back. But she's filming a conversation with them, but presumably just holding this thing up here. And it's just so like, who would do that? That would be so rude. And then there's other parts where she's just filming various family members doing mundane stuff like cleaning up. And you're just like, nobody is like that, especially this girl who isn't, shown to be that nerdy. She's actually really cute and seems like a relatively normal teenaged girl. So that was it was pointless, and they're not even trying anymore to justify it, and that's what made it so awkward. And occasionally the film will bring up something that you think is going to become relevant, but then the rest of the movie doesn't support it. Like, what was Toby's interest in the main girl? You think that she's maybe the focus at first, but over time it becomes more apparent that she's just sort of there. They talk about some virgin sacrifice thing, but they never go into that, and it's pretty much dropped as soon as it's brought up. Then there'll be times where Toby's harassing the parents for no reason. I really want to know in subsequent entries what the hell is up with this ghost, because he just goofs off. I could see him as like a little kid who just is so utterly bored waiting for something to happen, so he just starts screwing around with the family for no reason. But there's just so much of it didn't seem necessary. And then of course people do stupid ass things for the sake of the plot. Like, the dad witnesses something pretty crazy, and he's trying to explain it to his wife, who's just brushing him off in the most contrived way possible. In a way, it's like the third film where, he's actually trying to show her footage of the ghost and stuff, and she's like, no, I don't want to see any of that. And it's so hard to believe. Him to, like, brush off, like, more devastating things, like when a girl gets locked in the garage and is trying to explain that to her parents, and they're like, they don't even really react to that. I don't know if the directors chose not to really show that, but that just seemed really lazy on his part. So it was like all these errors with the script became more obvious than they were in the previous films. because at least those films could disguise them properly. I never felt, even with Paranormal Activity 3, that it was really being lazy. Maybe it was misfired. I wouldn't say it was a strong script, but at least they were kind of trying. Here, just like they're going through the motions now. But what's also really sad is they will occasionally like tease us with something really compelling. Like, I like the whole thing with the cult. It's like there's a more interesting story going on behind the scenes, but it never really brings that to the front where we could fully explore that. And that's just really frustrating, because it's like they wanted to maybe do something a little different, but then they don't. And they just give us the same shit that we've seen before. And the finale, it's just sort of lackluster, even though I thought the final scare was better than the third films. So, take that as you will. So I think that's really all I have to say. I thought the acting was mostly good. You know, it's actually sad but funny. Well, the funny part is I kept thinking the guy who plays the girl's father, he looks so much like Josh Brolin. And then I just found out that he died like a month ago, I believe. So that's sad, because he looked really young. I think he was in his 40s and he had a heart attack. I did like how the characters didn't feel like they were rehashes of the previous film's characters. That was a big flaw with Paranormal Activity 3, is that the dude seemed like a lazy, bland version of Mika. But this one, it seems like they just created their own characters, so that was a good thing. But I wouldn't say the characters were especially endearing or likable, even though I didn't root against them either. So, you know, as a whole, it just feels like the directors, they used up all their ideas for Paranormal Activity 3, so this is just sort of the series running off fumes. So, would I recommend it? You know, if you like the previous films, you'll probably like this one too. Well, you won't like it, but you'll probably see it, and I can't blame you, because I also saw it knowing that it would probably be the weakest. But otherwise, like, if you don't like the previous movies, don't bother watching it. And if you were maybe indifferent to the previous two films, wait till DVD, because there are so many better movies out right now. I'd say go watch Looper, watch Argo. If you want a horror movie, watch Sinister. That is actually pretty scary. Paranormal Activity 4 is just really subpar, and it's the kind of laziness that I really cannot stand in films these days. I could forgive incompetence to an extent, but I cannot forgive laziness. So that is that. If you'd like to read my written review, please check the link in my description. Hopefully my Cinema Snob movie review will be up this week, but we'll just have to see. That is all. I'll see you guys later.